President's speech this day at 12 o'clock, Thomas Jefferson, President of the United States, took the oath of office required by the Constitution, in the Senate chamber, in the presence of the Senate, the members of the House of Representatives, the public officers, and a large concourse of citizens.
On May 11, 1819, James Monroe became the first president to ride on a steamboat, actually a hybrid sailing ship/side-wheel steamer named Savannah, that would become the first such vessel to cross the Atlantic. Monroe was on board to inspect the harbor defenses of Savannah, Georgia.
John Quincy Adams was the first president photographed, although it was in 1843, long after Adams had left office. His presidency ran 1825 to 29. The image was made by a German-born artist named Philip Haas, who emigrated young to the United States but traveled to Paris to learn the art of the daguerreotype. This exciting new technology, the first photographic technique to be made available to the public, emerged in 1839.
In Ellicott's Mills, Maryland, President Andrew Jackson boards a Baltimore-Ohio Railroad train for a pleasure trip to Baltimore. Jackson, who had never been on a train before, was the first president to take a ride on the Iron Horse, as locomotives were known then.
The first successfully operated telegraph was demonstrated by Samuel F. B. Morse for President Martin Van Buren and his cabinet on February 21, 1838. In April, Morse applied for a patent that was granted 10 years later. The demonstration was impressive enough to win a congressional award of $30,000 for further experimental work, and about a year later, a 40-mile telegraph line was established between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland.
The first photograph of a sitting United States president was taken of William Henry Harrison on March 4, 1841. Harrison had just finished his inaugural address when he was asked to pose while the daguerreotype-style photograph was taken. Millard Fillmore, the 13th president, loved home cooking so much, he had the first cook stove installed in the White House.
Franklin Pierce installed the first central heating system in the first bathroom with hot and cold water in the White House.
On May 10, 1877, President Rutherford B. Hayes has the White House's first telephone installed in the mansion's telegraph room. President Hayes embraced the new technology, though he rarely received phone calls. In fact, the Treasury Department possessed the only other direct phone line to the White House at that time.
An elevator had been planned for the use of James Garfield's elderly mother, but his successor Chester Arthur installed the first one in 1881, an early hydraulic model, which required the removal of the stairs. In 1898, an electric model was installed.
The first president to install electric lighting at the White House was Benjamin Harrison in 1891, but he never touched the light switches himself, for fear of being electrocuted. This was a reasonable fear, given how crude household electric wiring could be at the time.
In 1889, during the first year of his presidency, President Benjamin Harrison gave a speech regarding the First Pan-American Congress. As he spoke, his voice was recorded by an Edison phonograph wax cylinder, and he became the first president to have his voice recorded and kept. It is the oldest known recording of a U.S. president's voice. Here is the audio.
As President of the United States, I was present at the First Pan-American Congress in Washington, D.C. Believe that with God's help, our two countries shall continue to live side by side in peace and prosperity. Benjamin Harrison.
It is the day of days in Washington, D.C. President McKinley is being inaugurated. Here comes the inaugural parade, headed by the famous Black Horse Cavalry, personal escort to the President. The crowds cheer and crane their necks, waiting for the president-elect to appear. Here he is, and with him, President Cleveland. In those days, even presidents had to ride in hack. The lonesome-looking gentleman in the carriage is Garrett Hobart. You've guessed it, he's the vice president.
The first serving president to ride in a car was President William McKinley, who briefly rode in a Stanley Motor Carriage Company steam car on July 13, 1901.
Leading up to William McKinley's presidency, a telephone, as well as a telegraph, state-of-the-art technology in 1896, had been installed in his house. McKinley and his campaign workers made use of this technology. Additionally, McKinley and his staff used these items to plan their political moves. Via telephone, McKinley was in close touch daily with his campaign headquarters in New York. Through the use of this technology, the course of presidential campaigns came into the modern age.
The cream of St. Louis society turned out to watch the daredevil aeronauts do their stuff. And there to the right in the back seat is Theodore Roosevelt. The man on the running board is Arch Hoxsey. He invites TR for a ride in his plane. And Teddy says, delighted. Roosevelt had to wait until he left the White House for this thrill. As president, he would not have been allowed to risk his life. It's the first time anybody ever had Roosevelt up in the air. A happy landing, and they were none too common in those days. Who said that Lindbergh had all the nerve? Everyone is asking Teddy how he liked it. And he grins
and says, bully.
According to newspaper reports, President Theodore Roosevelt slipped away from his home at Sagamore Hill during a driving rainstorm to take a ride on the submarine Plunger. The demonstration included diving to a depth of 40 feet and remaining submerged for half an hour while the president examined the boat. This was followed by an exhibition of porpoise diving. At one point, all the lights were extinguished and the crew worked the boat in total darkness. By all accounts, the boat rested motionless at a depth of 20 feet while a storm raged on the surface.
William Howard Taft, the 27th president, is one of those few presidents to have owned their own personal vehicles. And this Baker Electric is especially a very interesting one, as this was an electric car. The Baker Electric that William Howard Taft owned was a 1908 model year and had a top speed of 14 miles per hour, which is quite decent in those days for an electric car.
In 1920, radio station KDKA in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, announced that Harding was the official winner of that year's presidential election. It was the first time election returns were broadcast live. Harding was an advocate for advanced technology. On June 14, 1922, President Warren G. Harding, while addressing a crowd at the dedication of a memorial site for the composer of the Star-Spangled Banner, Francis Scott Key, becomes the first president to have his voice transmitted by radio. Harding was also the first president to own a radio and was the first to have one installed in the White House.
On December 6, 1923, the first presidential address was broadcast on the radio. President Calvin Coolidge delivered what is now known as the State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress. The New York Times anticipated Coolidge's address in its December 5th edition. The voice of President Coolidge, addressing Congress tomorrow, will be carried over a greater portion of the United States and will be heard by more people than the voice of any man in history.
The value of everybody's property raises the scale of everybody's wages. One of the greatest favors that can be bestowed upon the American people is economy in government.
In April of 1939, Franklin D. Roosevelt, 32nd President, became the first President of the United States to appear on television. The setting was the 1939 World's Fair in New York. The appearance was broadcast to a handful of TV sets in the New York area. On January 14, 1943, Franklin D. Roosevelt becomes the first president to travel on official business by airplane. Crossing the Atlantic by air, Roosevelt flew in a Boeing 314 flying boat dubbed the Dixie Clipper to a World War II strategy meeting with Winston Churchill at Casablanca in North Africa.
By order of Harry S. Truman, 33rd President, the United States detonated 2 nuclear weapons over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6 and 9, 1945, respectively. The 2 bombings killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people, most of whom were civilians, and remain the only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict.
On July 12, 1957, Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes the first president to ride in the newest advance in aviation technology, the helicopter.
The cameras you see before you are color cameras. They are now transmitting a black and white picture. By pressing this button, which I now do, the cameras are transmitting a live color picture. When you step before them, you will be making your first appearance on color television from Washington. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Very much. President Sarnoff, distinguished guests, fellow Americans, I think all of us realize that in these fast-moving times, it is highly important that our nation's capital should be attached to every single citizen in this country by the very fastest, best kind of communications. I was completely overwhelmed by the technical complexities and problems that the broadcasting industry has been solving. I congratulate every citizen whose understanding of this nation, of the world, will be made better and fuller by this development. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Dwight D. Eisenhower later became the first president to employ a jet aircraft in 1959. In 1960, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon squared off in the first televised presidential debates in American history. Kennedy would win the 1960 election, and Nixon would later go on to win in 1968.
In September of 1962, J.F. Kennedy, 35th President, vowed in a speech to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Kennedy did not live to see it, but the dream was fulfilled in 1969.
Lyndon Baines Johnson, the 36th president, was the first president to be inaugurated on an airplane, unfortunately due to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The earliest known usage of a call button was from the Lyndon Johnson presidency. Lyndon B. Johnson had a series of buttons, or keys, to summon different drinks to the Oval Office, Cabinet Room, and Little Lounge, a room just next to the Oval Office. In the Oval Office, the keys were on the table behind the president's desk. The 4 keys were for coffee, tea, Coke, and Fresca, and when pressed, a butler would fulfill the president's drink request.
In 1960, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon squared off in the first televised presidential debates in American history. Kennedy would win the 1960 election, and Nixon would later go on to win in 1968.
On July 20, 1969, President Nixon made a long-distance telephone call to the astronauts that had landed on the moon.
Jimmy Carter, born James Earl Carter, 39th President, was the first president who was born in a hospital. He was born in the Wise Sanitarium of Plains, Georgia, in 1924. In 1983, Ronald Reagan, 40th President, signs an executive order allowing civilian use of the Pentagon's Global Positioning System.
Bill Clinton, 42nd President, was the first to send out an email.
George W. Bush, 43rd President, was the first to have his State of the Union address broadcast on the World Wide Web, or Internet.
Barack Obama was the first president to carry a smart device, a BlackBerry, and even so, it wasn't until 2016 that the leader of the free world was finally able to trade in his aging RIM device for a modern smartphone. He also was the first president to have written a line of computer code.
Donald Trump, 45th President, was the first president to have a personal YouTube channel and reach 1 million subscribers. Subsequently, he also became the first president to be banned from a social media platform.
Joe Biden, 46th President, announced his plan to elevate the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy to a cabinet-level position for the first time, a move meant to highlight his commitment to science.